Greetings aspirants. Welcome to Narayana IAS. This is Ananta Krishna. In this edition of Daily News Analysis, we have picked up few articles from the Indian Express as well as the Hindu newspaper. The first article that we will be discussing is this issue of expulsion of Lok Sabha MP Mahua Moitra on the recommendation of the ethics panel of Lok Sabha. The second article that we will be discussing is the RBI's monetary policy stance and the ramifications of such policy stance. The third article that we have picked up is this India's alarming fixed dose combination problem, because of which we are witnessing this issue of antimicrobial resistance. The fourth article is talking about the health of the glaciers and the burning issue of glacial lake outburst floods and the related concerns. The fifth article that we have picked up is the India's re-emergence in the field of art and architecture, which is being used as a tool for soft power for India in order to showcase herself as a representative in the global power struggle. Coming to the first article, we will look into this issue of what after Mahua's expulsion. We know that this has raked up a lot of debate in the media. And this issue is important for us from the both preliminary and main examination point of view. We know that the committees which are in the form of either ethics committee or privilege committee, which we refer to as inquiry committees in general, are important for this particular year, in fact even for the next year too. Second, given the fact that these committees have started functioning, we see that there is an element of need for reform with respect to functioning of these particular committees. It is in this particular context we want to discuss this particular topic in depth. Moving on to the significance of this topic, even from the perspective of previous year questions, we see that earlier, in many occasions, there were questions in the preliminary examination, and we here also see the questions from the main examination. In 2021, for example, this departmental related parliamentary standing committees and their working with suitable examples has been asked. In 2018, if you see, the question on estimates committee and its particular functioning in a particular context has also been asked. Given the significance of this topic, we will look at the context in which this issue has actually been discussed about. We know that the Lok Sabha yesterday has expelled this member of parliament or member of Lok Sabha, Mahua Moitra, over this allegation of cash for query. Having expelled, we know that this act of expulsion was on the basis of a particular recommendation from the ethics committee. The ethics committee of Lok Sabha has found her guilty of sharing her credentials, login credentials of her membership in Lok Sabha with respect to what sort of questions have to be asked with some other members and with some other businessmen. Apart from that, we know that she has accepted gifts in the form of certain favor from businessmen in order to ask these questions. So it is this allegation which has led to the expulsion of this member from Lok Sabha. Keep in mind that the ethics committee has made this particular recommendation on the basis of which a resolution has been passed in Lok Sabha in order to expel this female member of Lok Sabha. Along with this, we also know that this is the first time ever in the history of the Lok Sabha and for that matter in the parliament that the ethics committee has made a recommendation with respect to expulsion of a particular parliamentarian. It is this context which makes it very important for the exam. Along with this, we also have the history of the other so-called inquiry committee referred to as the privileges committee. Earlier in 2005 has made such recommendation for the expulsion of more than 10 members of Lok Sabha with respect to certain allegation in the form of such reception of cash in order to pose certain questions in Lok Sabha. Now, having discussed the context, we shall look at a brief background with respect to these so-called inquiry committees. Remember that these inquiry committees, whatever that we are referring to in the form of either ethics committee, which is in the news yesterday and today, and the privileges committee As we have seen, are referred to as the inquiry committees, meaning they act in the form of a quasi-judicial body and they interrogate into certain allegations which have been posed against the members of parliament, either lower house or the upper house. Second, these inquiry committees, particularly the ethics committee, which has come into being, has been recommended in a particular backdrop. The backdrop that you see is this understanding across the political circles that there is a general erosion of ethical values. Keep in mind, ethics is a bench of standards that you define in order to make sure that the practice of these values are there within the society such that the conduct is going to be prudent in relational terms. This general erosion of ethical values alongside the recognition that there is widespread corruption and also there is an increased trend of criminalization of politics within Indian politics. These are the two fundamental reasons which have led to this formation of what is called as. So the N.N. Ohra Committee in 1993 has been set up in the backdrop of this identification that there is increased corruption and criminalization of politics across the political spectrum in India, number one. And number two, we see that in general too, there is erosion of ethical values across the society. It is this particular context which has led to the formation of this committee called N.N. Ohra Committee. This committee has presented a report in 1995 and it has clearly and categorically established that there is a criminal, police, bureaucrat and politician nexus. It is this nexus which is being seen as a broader spectrum within the Indian politics. So the issue of expulsion of Mahua Moitra has to be seen from the context of this larger spectrum which has already been identified, number one. Number two, by establishing this nexus, the N.N. Ohra Committee has recommended that there has to be a scope for probity in public life. Probity in public life depends upon two fundamental factors. Number one, the transparency as a principle in public life, and number two, accountability as a principle in public life. The transparency and accountability factors and which have to be ensured in the conduct of the members of parliament. He said that this disciplining mechanism is required within the parliament and this disciplining mechanism has to be the self-disciplining one. Meaning, Indian Constitution has adopted this principle of separation of powers, and as per the separation of powers, we know that the functionality of the organs of the government, has been separated. So we treat that legislation is a specialized function, execution of the law is a specialized function, and similarly even the interpretation of the law is again a specialized function. By recognizing that these are very specialized functions, legislature should be given an autonomous functioning, which is what this separation of powers principle demarcate. Given the autonomous functioning that is required in principle for the functioning of the legislature in any democracy, the committee has recommended a self-disciplining mechanism for parliament. And moreover, we also know that given the separation of power principle, we have this article 122 which has been adopted, and this article 122 clearly states that there cannot be any entry of judiciary into the affairs of the parliament with respect to either conduct of the members or otherwise. So clearly separating the role of judiciary from the affairs of the parliament, the in-house mechanism is required both for Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha in order to see that this probity in public life through the accountability and transparency mechanisms in the form of self-containing regulatory mechanisms is a requirement. It is this particular recommendation which has led to the establishment of what is referred to as Ethics Committee in 2000. Having established this, In this particular case, we say that this ethics committee as a quasi-judicial body, having considered itself as an inquiry committee, we know that it has inquired into the allegations that has been posed against this female member of Lok Sabha. Now, when the members of the ethics committee are probing into this particular allegation, they are in fact acting as quasi-judges. As they are acting as quasi-judges, whatever the outcome that would be there will be in the form of quasi-judgment. And every judgment must be biased towards principle. Here, in this particular issue, the questions have been arised because of the fact that the ethics committee has arrived at conclusion based on certain evidence within a very short span of time, calling it speedy delivery of justice. Calling it speedy delivery of justice. However, the Constitution under Article 21 guarantees what is referred to as due process of law. The due process of law recommends that not only the law which has to be fair and just, along with the fact that it has to be reasonable, it also recommends that the law, along with the substance, the procedure that you follow adhering to that particular law must also be fair, just and reasonable. It is this assumption that we will have when the inquiry committee is acting as a quasi-judicial body. Now, when we see that whether the justice has been delivered in the procedural terms or not, we see that when this ethics panel has recommended the Lok Sabha with a recommendation that the concerned member has to be expelled from parliament, remember that it has given a report of nearly 475 pages, and these 475 pages of report has been considered by the Lok Sabha within 30 minutes as it has been reported. Reading a report of that size within 30 minutes is humanly not possible. Considering this, critics have pointed out that the procedure that has to be followed, whereby this report has to be actually recommended to another committee to go through it and come up with her recommendations before passing this particular resolution, has not been adhered to. It is this procedural lapse that we are referring to. So the procedurally, whether the due process of law has been followed or not is coming into the question. Second, we have to look at this justice from the substantial point of view. What does it mean? Substantial law recommends that there has to be a clear ground when one frames the other with certain charges. The grounds that you see in this particular issue has not been revealed, and yet they say that this is a heinous and objectionable crime, making it more of adjective driven rather than verb driven. And we know that any adjective is descriptive in nature, but it cannot give you any definite definition. We say that, and the critics say that substantially too, the grounds are vague and ambiguous. And the speed with which this has been delivered, without adhering to this critical issue of due process of law in terms of procedure and this substance, is what being subjected to a lot of criticism. Number one. Number two, along with this, we have this issue of justice being delivered. However, this justice, whatever has been delivered, is being seen with the character of retribution. Retribution is, according to Rabindranath Tagore, is a sign of degradation of the society. The justice and the judgment has to be towards reform. The judgment of the ethics committee and the decision of the Lok Sabha to expel the member see this possibility of ensuring reformative justice. Along with this, there is also criticism that there are different yardsticks which have been followed for the different members from the different political color. For example, if you see the composition of this ethics committee which has recommended the expulsion of this member, you see that 6 members are from one particular political color and the 4 members are from the other particular political color. You see that a member belonging to a particular political color has voted unambiguously towards one particular decision, and the other 4 members of the ethics committee who are belonging to some other political color have unambiguously voted against that particular decision. So this majority decision that you are seeing is probably driven by the political affiliation rather than the factor of impartiality that ethics committee must have followed when they are acting as an inquiry committee in the form of a quasi-judicial body. It is all these matters which are posing these questions of due process of law. It is in this respect this has been questioned. And moreover, there were many occasions in the form of disruptions in the parliament, tearing off the questions, tearing off the documents within the floor of the parliament. You see that there are many such ethical violations occurring within the floor of the parliament, but in no case you see that such a measure has been considered. It is these different yardsticks which make this particular decision questionable according to critics. Now, what must be the way forward in this particular case? NN Vohra committee, by looking and sensing these possibilities, has made certain far-reaching reforms rather than making this functionality of ethics committee a singular institution working on case by cases with respect to such ethical violations of conduct. What he has recommended is that there has to be an adoption of code of conduct by the political parties itself. It is not just that once you become the member of house of a particular house, you are endowed with certain code of conduct, but it is about your entry into the politics itself has to be on the basis of a model code of conduct. This model code of conduct, if you are adhering to, then it is ensuring the probity in public life, whereby your actions are transparent and your actions are simultaneously accountable. Second, it also recommended that whatever the funding that goes to the political party, all this funding must be open and transparent. Number 2, all these also have to be audited, meaning rather than the secrecy that we maintain with respect to these funding of political parties, he is recommending a transparent funding mechanism with respect to these political parties. Whether it is private funded or state funded, it's a separate matter. However, it has to be transparent and at the same time it has to be audited such that there is a level playing field within the functioning of the democracy through these political parties. Along with this, he also states that rather than just limiting this issue of probity in public life with respect to parliament alone, he makes a far-reaching recommendation in the form of a far-reaching reform. He says that you simplify the procedure related to the criminal justice system, incorporating this idea of due process of law by making it reasonable, by making it fair, by making it just, alongside by making it simple, whereby the grounds and the procedure are clearly defined. Number 2, once you do this, he recommends the dispensation of justice quickly would be possible, and this is what in fact is a requirement in order to ensure more and more ethical conduct within the society, not just within the politics. We'll move to the next article as we have done this particular article. Coming to the next article, we shall look at this bi-monthly monetary policy review that has been announced by the Monetary Policy Committee, and we see that in this particular bi-monthly monetary policy review, the RBI has voted for keeping the repo rate at the same 6.5 percentage points. Along with this, we also see, as it has been predicted, that there is an upward revision in the GDP forecast for the economy. We see that Previously, this Monetary Policy Committee and her decisions have been asked in the UPSC examination, particularly in the preliminary examination, and you see that in this particular question, the Monetary Policy Committee is being focused upon based on certain functionalities that it has. Given this importance for the exam, we shall look at this article in detail. What is the context? You see that the Monetary Policy Committee has come up with the unanimous decision to keep this particular interest rate unchanged. We know that the repo rate is referred to as the key interest rate here, and this repo rate has been kept at the 6.5 percentage points, and we know that all the other forms of interest that you see or interest rate that you define are dependent on this repo rate as a mechanism, and hence you see here that the interest rates across the spectrum would remain unchanged, number one. Number two, we also see that the GDP forecast for the financial year 2023 and 2024 has been revised upwards to 7% from the previous projection of 6.5%. This particular increase that it is projecting is on the basis of the fact that the average inflation for the particular financial year would remain at this particular value of 5.4%, meaning the consumer price index, which includes some of the goods and services that the consumers buy and consume for the purpose of their satisfaction of needs, wherein, as I said, there are certain key basket of goods and services which are under consideration. From the consumption point of view, it is being kept at this particular value of 5.4%. It is in this particular context we shall look at this particular article and try to see in an elaborate way why this particular issue is important for us. We know that this monetary policy has been devised as a mechanism as per this RBI Act 1934. This RBI Act 1934 defines the fundamental objective of the monetary policy. This fundamental objective is to make sure that there is price stability within the economy, while there is push for the economic growth, by which categorically monetary policy is saying that the objective for the monetary policy first of all must be the effort to ensure price stability within the economy, and over and above this, they have to make sure that there are efforts towards the economic growth. Having said this particular objective, we know that the monetary policy also objectively focused at what is referred to as regulation of resources. In any economy, we find that the households at the grassroots level are contributing their factors in the form of factors of production to set up what is called as firm, and these factors of production which come together to form this particular firm would produce something, and this production is what we refer to as production of final goods and services, and these goods and services in turn will be consumed by the households themselves within the economy. So you are seeing that here there is production process, and here you are seeing that there is consumption process, and this is an endless process for the economy. And within this particular process, in order to increase the production and in order to increase the productivity within the economy, there is only one way that is being defined. The way is to raise more and more savings within the economy, and these savings have to be translated into investment, such that as you invest more, you are trying to generate the ability to produce more. It is this mechanism of savings translating into investment is what we refer to as the mechanism. The mechanism of finance, as I said, which combines the ones who have surplus resources with the ones who do not have these surplus resources or who are looking for such surplus resources in order to produce more is what we are focusing upon, and this is what is being regulated by the monetary policy at the foundational level. So this regulation of resource mobilization through the savings process and the regulation of resource mobilization with respect to towards whom these resources must go, which is referred to as the mechanism of finance, is what the monetary policy is aiming at. This is what we refer to as regulation of finance. And within this regulation of finance, on the basis of time period for which this finance is being provided to the production units, we have short-term finance and the long-term finance. The short-term finance is referred to as money market in terms of market structure. The long-term finance would come under what is referred to as capital market. So when monetary policy is aiming at regulation of finance, precisely the monetary policy is aiming to regulate the money market within the economy. So the regulation of money market is being done with one particular instrument, that is repo rate. Repo rate is the anchor which defines and sets the interest rate, that is the level at which one can earn when they transfer their surplus funds towards someone who is looking for these surplus funds in order to produce more. When they say that repo rate is the anchor, I repeat, it is the rate at which, or the interest rate at which, the finance would occur within the economy. It defines the benchmark for the rate at which the financial activities would occur. And we also know that, as we have seen in the objective itself, the economic growth which needs to push the production and productivity levels further must happen when there is price stability within the economy. So this interest rate is not only aimed at ensuring that there is growth through finance, but also it is aimed at maintaining price stability. The maintenance of price stability can be done, as I said, by regulating the money supply. Within the economy, as we see, either the production units or the households, either for the process of production or for the process of consumption, would be demanding more and more monetary resources. And this demand in monetary resource has to be met with the money supply. So when we have this policy stance through monetary policy, they are regulating both of these, demand for money and supply of money, through this particular anchor called repo rate. By and large, this defines and sets what is referred to as monetary policy. Alongside, in order to make sure that there is certain legal mechanism which is functioning with respect to price stability, RBI in 2016, through the Finance Act of 2016, has adopted this inflation targeting framework, wherein it said that the target inflationary level that we can have within the economy has to be set at this particular 4 percentage points with certain bandwidth at the lower level and at the upper level, plus or minus 2. So it can hover between 2 percentage points to 6 percentage points. However, precisely the economy will flourish and grow more when the prices and the price level are stable at this particular percentage of 4 percentage points. And we have to keep in mind that this inflation targeting framework is based on the consumer price index. Having understood the monetary policy and its functionality at the foundational level, we shall look at what is the policy stance of the current monetary policy bi-monthly review. You can see in this particular figure that in this new cycle of the monetary policy, wherein there is withdrawal of money supply from the economy by increasing the interest rate and by making the cost of borrowing more by increasing the interest rate, you see that there is a gradual increase in the interest rate. However, for last few policy reviews, you see that this interest rate has been kept at this percentage of 6.5 percentage points. The simple reason is that in spite of this particular level of cost of borrowing, while maintaining the necessary liquidity within the economy could grow at levels which are seem to be impossible for any other economy in the world, meaning that there is enough liquidity within the economy to push the production further and further and to improve the productivity further, number one. And number two, by setting the interest rate unchanged, they want to continue this process of higher growth at the current level of cost of borrowing through finance by the production units. Number two, there is also another concern that we have. We know that the price stability is the fundamental principle on the basis of which the economic growth has to occur as per the objective of the monetary policy. However, as you might have seen in the newspaper today itself, that there is a stock limit that is being imposed on wheat, there is an export control that is imposed on onion. We also see that on the other hand, as part of global headwinds, OPEC Plus is trying to cut the fuel production, which are posing the commodity price shock as a challenge to the economy. So given this shock that might be possible, which is causing a lot of uncertainty, the keeping of interest rates intact on the one hand is keeping the money supply intact. On the other hand, given the supply side uncertainty in the form of possible commodity shock, what we see is that the so-called accommodative stance, by which it means that in order to move ahead with respect to this particular path of keeping the interest rate at a particular level now and then gradually reducing it, this thought of reducing the interest rate in future has been now completely removed. So they were saying that until August 2024, the interest rates decline might not happen within Indian economy. This is what removal of accommodative stance means. So this withdrawal of accommodative stance was because of this uncertainty on the supply side, and this uncertainty may pose the challenge of price instability within the economy, in turn which might threaten the growth process that we have already introduced into the economy. It is in this respect the policy stance has been categorically cleared. Moreover, apart from this particular stance, RBI has also mentioned that there are certain regulatory measures that it wanted to introduce. One, you keep in mind that the UPI payment limits have been increased. The reason for this is that unlike in any other part of the world where this UPI payment revolution is being witnessed, what we see in India is rather than the value of transaction, what we see in India is more of volume. Meaning, if you want to transfer a 1 rupee to someone, you are doing it through UPI, whereas in some other cases in other economies, what you see is rather than this volume, it is the value of transaction which is very, very high. Alongside, what we also witness is that the currency in circulation, particularly of the higher denomination notes, have again reached the pre-demonetization levels. This has been a concern for the government and also for the monetary authority, which are aiming at introducing the digital economy, more and more cashless economy. Given this increase in the payment limits, enhancing the payment limits through UPI might bring about certain change. This is one aspect. Second aspect, when they have increased these UPI payment limits, this must also be understood from the perspective of the effort that is being put in order to make sure that the cost of remittances is being reduced. In Indian economy and elsewhere in the world, what we see is there is inflow and outflow of many workers in search of jobs, and when they go there, they function there as residents of those economies. Whatever the income that they get, they would like to send this income back to their families. Once this is being clear, then while sending back these incomes, what they face is the cost of sending back is very, very high. For example, in Africa, if you send money from South Africa to Zimbabwe, more than 40% of the sum that you have earned has to go as cost of income transfer or the transfer of this particular money, because of which they would resort to some other illegal means in order to transfer these sums. It is this which they want to address by increasing the possibility of such transfers at higher levels. So the RBI's aim in this particular measure had been manifold. This is one aspect. Second, what we see is the increasing number of loans that is being given through the app mode, and this digital mode through which loans are being disbursed are largely outside the purview of the regulation of the monetary authority. So what the RBI has said is this problem of web aggregation of the loan products that the economy is witnessing has to be now clearly brought under the digital lending framework or the regulatory framework that RBI has already announced. Number three, silently, we also see that this very important report of consumer confidence survey has also been released by RBI. This consumer confidence survey tries to project the level of demand that would be there, or rather the consumer demand that would be there for the coming 2 months. And as it has projected, it is very bright for the coming 2 months in terms of this report of consumer confidence survey. Moving to the next article, we will look at this continuous and evergreen problem of fixed dose combination drugs in India. Previously, there was a direct question which has been asked on this particular topic in 2013. Simply, he was asking about what do you understand by the fixed dose drug combinations, and he is asking you to discuss their merits and demerits. Given the significance of this topic, not only from the UPSC point of view, but also from the point of view of the social cost that it involves, we will delve into the understanding of these FDCs. What is the context in which this issue actually is being discussed? We have to keep in mind that in India, within the market, there is prevalence of many unapproved and even sometimes the banned fixed dose combination drugs, which are antibiotics that are being sold in India. This is something that is a matter of concern for the government and the society together. What are these fixed dose combination drugs? These fixed dose combination drugs combine either 2 or more ingredients to come up with one single antibiotic. However, as you combine 2 or more ingredients together to manufacture one particular antibiotic, this has been made into a concern because of the fact that there is this rising tendency of antimicrobial resistance in India. There is a rising tendency of antimicrobial resistance in India. It is this particular larger context which is making this issue a matter of concern. When we know that this has become a matter of concern, yet still there is alliance for manufacturing of these FDCs, that is fixed dose combinations, because of one single reason. The predominant reason is that when a particular person is to take 2 or more microbial related treatment drugs, that is the antibiotics, then we were facing the issue of compliance from such persons. He might take one particular drug and leave behind the another drug. In order to avoid such possibilities with respect to certain disease burden, for example, AIDS, the FDCs were very, very handy. It is in this context, in order to ease the compliance, the fixed dose combinations were allowed. However, in spite of this, what we see is the combination of drugs which are being manufactured, which are unapproved by the drug regulatory authorities. It is this unapproved manufacture and the activity of selling of these unapproved drugs in the market, which has led to this a very huge social burden. That social burden, as you see, is this antimicrobial resistance as a larger issue, larger concern. In this antimicrobial resistance, what happens is the microorganisms against which these antibiotics have to work, have to fight against, these microorganisms become resistant to the drugs which are designed to kill them. As these bacteria or the microorganisms become drug resistant, these drugs become ineffective against the disease burden across the society. It is not just for the individual who is not taking these drugs, but across the entire social situation. It is this which had been the main concern for the government and the society. Apart from this, there are certain individual challenges also because of these FDCs. What are they? We see that when you combine 2 or 3 ingredients together, either one or the other ingredient might be malfunctioning, because of which there might be adverse effect on the metabolic activity of an individual. Number 2, even when there are certain inactive ingredients that you add as impurities in general, these inactive ingredients might also malfunction, because of which there might be an adverse effect on the metabolic activity. Number 2, these ingredients sometimes interact with each other in order to create certain toxicity within the body, because of which there will be adverse effect on the health condition of the individual. And number 3, when there are FDCs in the market, in place of taking one particular drug or one particular antibiotic, you would go for taking a drug, or the seller might sell a drug which is a combination of multiple antibiotics or multiple ingredients. So because of this, in spite of lack of requirement, you are seeing a situation of over compliance with respect to certain antibiotics. So these have become certain individual challenges with respect to these FDCs. In order to make sure that these challenges are removed, then in spite of these challenges, why do we see that the pharmaceutical companies are interested in producing more FDCs? Straight answer would be that they are looking at higher profits. Now, how come these FDCs are generating more profits for them? Under this drugs price control order, we have a regulation that there will be a price control over the individual drugs. The FDCs are not covered under this price control order, because of which their price can be at higher levels. So the profits can also be of a higher margin. This is the first factor. The second factor is that the standards that we have from the drug regulatory authority is with respect to the individual drugs, but not the combination of drugs. On the other hand, as there are no standards, in fact, the manufacture itself should not happen unless and until there is the approval from the Central Drug Authority. However, this has been taken as a loophole in order to penetrate number of such FDCs into the Indian pharmaceutical market. This has become a burden, as I said, because of the freedom from the compliance with respect to the standards of manufacturing and the quality of these drugs from the Pharmacopoeia Commission. Moreover, as there is no need of showing any compliance towards these standards, then the possibility would be that you are free from the prosecution under Drugs and Cosmetics Act. It is this which is making the pharmaceutical companies easily manufacture these FDCs. Apart from that, there are also certain issues from the regulatory authority too. The first such regulatory issue is the issue within the drug administration. On the one hand, the state drug controllers are approving these pharma companies to come up with the manufacturing by granting them these licenses. But on the other hand, we also know that the DCGI, that is the head of CDSCO, has not given any approval for such manufacture. This discrepancy is also being used by the pharma companies to produce these drugs. Along with this, there are certain other regulatory weaknesses from CDSCO too. It is in this particular situation, we see that there is flood of these the FDCs into the Indian pharma market. Moreover, this situation has been exacerbated number of occasions even in the past. We had this committee called Chandrakant Kokate panel in 2015, which said that there are certain FDCs which have penetrated into the Indian market, which are not approved by the regulatory authorities and which have to be in fact banned according to this particular committee. Moreover, the Drugs Technically Advisory Board in 2018 has recommended that the FDCs of a particular quality and of a particular standard have to be banned in India. So there were efforts to work on the FDCs and their prevalence in the Indian pharma market. However, the results are yet to be realized. Given this challenge, we have certain suggestions to be followed. One is that the central government, the union government, being the head of this regulation, must bring about certain guidelines such that the manufacturers go through strict compliance towards not only the pricing but also with respect to the standards. Second, we must also make sure that this regulatory approval at the state level, district level and at the national level are acting with regard to the coordination that is required. I repeat, there has to be coordination amongst the various agencies from the local level to the national level amongst the regulatory authorities while granting these approvals to manufacture FDCs. Third, we also have this Drugs and Cosmetics Act, which has to be made stringent such that in case of any violation, there can be prosecution and also there can be certain penalty and punishment. Lastly, we have this suggestion that the CDSCO, that is the regulatory authority, must constitute a study over the efficacy and safety of these fixed dose combinations such that in cases where it is required, it can be staying, and in cases where it is not required, that can be done away with. Moving to the next article, we look at this very important ecological article that has appeared in the Hindu newspaper. It's talking about what is referred to as an IC warning. Before getting into the details of this article, let us look at some of the occurrences of this issue in the previous year question papers. In 2017, there was this question over the cryosphere and how it is affecting the global climate. Moreover, in 2014, there was also a question seeking to understand the relationship between the shrinking Himalayan glaciers and also the symptoms of climate change that we are witnessing within the Indian subcontinent. As you see, this is a favorite topic for the examiner. It is in this context we'll delve into the details of this particular article. What is the context in which this issue has appeared in the newspaper? Recently, the World Meteorological Organization has released a report titled as the Global Climate 2011 to 2020, wherein it is trying to talk about the state of the global climate within this particular decade. In this particular report, specifically, there is a chapter which has been allocated to understand the health of the glaciers. In this, they were mentioning about the state of glaciers, wherein they were stating that the glaciers have been thinned. The glaciers have been thinned by nearly 1 meter per year, 1 meter per year, because of which there are concerns about the health of these glaciers, as we see that this is much beyond the natural rate of melting that we generally witness from these glaciers. It is in this particular context we are looking at this particular issue. Moreover, we also know that alongside these melting, as you see, happening at a rapid rate. We see that there are increased occurrences of what is referred to as glacial lake outburst floods. These glacial lake outburst floods, for example, was witnessed recently in the state of Sikkim. We know that there was a huge cloudburst over this South Lonak Lake, which is a glacial lake, and because of the cloudburst alongside whatever the glacial melt that was happening, this flooding has taken away and washed away the dam that has been constructed over this particular lake. And we have to keep in mind that this dam, in fact, was built on the moraine base that it has. It is in this particular context that we are looking at this issue of glacial lake outburst floods. Keep in mind that there is some conceptual requirement that one has to know. One is, when you refer to what is referred to as climate, you are referring to a long-term statistical understanding of certain ecological factors. Long-term statistical understanding of ecological factors such as temperature and pressure. This long-term ecological understanding of certain ecological factors such as temperature is what we refer to as climate. So there is a long-term average that you see in terms of a pattern with respect to these critical ecological factors, number one. Number two, the impact of this long-term average, as you see, which is subjected to certain changes. You see that these changes are visible in the short-term periods. And this short-term period, when you refer to in terms of time scale, and within this short-term period, the changes in the temperature are such critical ecological factors result into certain patterns which we refer to as weather patterns. It is these weather patterns which have become erratic because of the changes in the long-term averages of our understanding of the critical ecological factors is what leading to the occurrence of these events within the ecosystems, within the biomes. Number two, these climatic changes which are appearing in the form of certain erratic weather pattern are visible through two fundamental principles of ecology, and this is acting as a cause and effect mechanism. The two fundamental principles of ecology are the energy flow and the material cycle. All the materials in any ecosystem is subjected to a cyclical flow, cyclical pattern. On the other hand, the energy will flow in a very linear pattern. In this issue of climate impacting weather through these critical ecological factors, what you see is it is these two particular fundamental principles of any ecosystem which are being subjected to a lot of alteration. In this particular issue of glacier, what you see is this is subjected to what is referred to as hydrological cycle or simply water cycle, as you see here. The water cycle will have this phenomena of initially evaporation, then condensation, then what is referred to as the precipitation. And this precipitation process occurs throughout this particular planet, and when it occurs in the form of what is called as snowfall, when it occurs in the form of snowfall, this leads to the beginning of the formation of what is referred to as glacier. This we see in the short-term periods. However, over the long term, over the geological time scale, for last few millions of years, the occurrence of glaciers had been because of the continental drift. The continental drift, if it is occurring towards the poles, then the formation of the glaciers is larger. If the continent is drifting towards the equator, then the formation of the glacier is used to be, chances of glacial formation used to be smaller. Given these long-term and short-term tendencies, within the short-term periods, the occurrence of glacier and the continuation of glacial landform would be because of the hydrological cycle, or it is part of this so-called hydrological cycle. So the precipitation, whenever it occurs and when it leads to the what is referred to as snowfall, this forms the beginning of, as I said, the glacial landform, number one. Number two, whenever this subsequent snowfall occurs, it acts as an overburden. This overburden leads to the formation of snowflakes, and these snowflakes over a period of time become larger and larger, and as the summer temperatures are lower in terms of those critical ecological factors in the form of temperature, then this snow melt is going to be very slow and less, leading to the continuous formation of a glacial landform. This glacier, hence, when it occurs over a large chunk of area, we refer to this as cryosphere. It is this conceptual background that you have to know before moving into the ecology behind these glaciers and what is the issue behind these glacial lake outburst floods. As you see here in this particular picture, you have something referred to as zone of accumulation and you have something referred to as zone of ablation. Whenever the glacial formation is occurring, in this zone of accumulation is what? The continuous fall of or precipitation of snow would occur, and over time through the process of formation, the glacial formation would occur. However, it would be possible that this glacier will have a size only to the extent of certain limit. This limit is referred to as the equilibrium line. Until this equilibrium line, the glacial formation would occur. Below that, the impact of the temperature in the form of solar insolation would be there, and given this, the melting of ice would be occurring. So the runoff would be beginning from this equatorial line, and whenever the runoff is seen, that is referred to as zone of ablation. What we are witnessing as of now in this zone of accumulation and zone of ablation is that because of the increase in the global temperatures over the long periods throughout the industrial revolution and the post-industrial revolution phase, the zone of accumulation and the equilibrium line is shifting upwards, reducing the size of the glacier, and hence the zone of ablation is increasing, whereby we are saying that the melting of ice is occurring rapidly and in more quantity. This is of course leading to this situation of sea level rise on the one hand, but on the other hand, the regions which are lying just below these glaciers are experiencing, because of this, a sudden increase in the volume of the lake in terms of the water that they contain, and sudden increase in the volume of the lake is leading to the occurrence of glacial lake outburst floods. Now, as you see in the ecology of these glaciers, you know that there is this landform referred to as cirque, and this cirque is a basin or depression, and when the lake gets melted at a rapid rate, this depression gets filled rapidly. However, this depression is protected as a form of natural dam because of what is referred to as moraines. These moraine is the deposits that you see just below these particular lakes, which act as the natural dam. But we have to keep in mind that these moraine are the deposits or erosional deposits because of the movement of the glacier. These erosional deposits in the form of moraine being loose in spite of the fact that they are compact, when there is overcapacity within this particular lake, they cannot withstand the pressure, and hence the sudden outburst of the flood would be occurring. It is this reason which has caused even the flood recently in the Sikkim. The problem with this particular glacial lake outburst flood is that it is not defined as a disaster within the law of disaster management. This is the biggest reason why there is no preparedness from the state, and also because this is the biggest reason why there are no efforts towards the mitigation plans. apart from the idea of adaptation, mitigation remains to be the important chunk of the fight against the climate change. The efforts towards addressing this issue would be in the right direction in order to address the consequences that the various glacial having not included as a disaster, as there is no preparedness and as there is no possibility of coming up with any mitigation efforts, this has remained as a continuous challenge for the policy makers. Moving to the next article, we see that the India is celebrating a biennial program at Red Fort, and the Prime Minister has inaugurated this. And the Prime Minister, while inaugurating this event, has pronounced that India's re-emergence in the field of art and architecture will benefit the entire world. What is the context in which this event is being held? We can recall that Prime Minister, on the eve of India's independence, has pronounced that India has to celebrate her cultural heritage. Moving into this era of what he refers to as Amrit Kal, where India is aiming to becoming a Vikasit Bharat by 2047. On the other hand, this objective of achieving the status of developed nation must happen alongside the preservation of the rich cultural heritage that India has. It is in this particular context we have inaugurated this biennial event, which is being promoted as a global event from India with respect to celebration of such cultural heritage. On the other hand, we also know that India projects herself as the leader of the and voice of the global South. And this leader and voice of the global South, it has to promote what is referred to as soft power. The cultural diplomacy and the celebration of rich cultural heritage is seen as the soft power that the India is trying to exercise to influence most of the nations in this particular global South. It is in this particular context we are looking at this particular article. What you see here in this India Art, Architecture and Design Biennial, shortly referred to as IAADB, we see that this inaugural biennial is being held at the Red Fort. From the preliminary point of view, keep in mind this particular fact. Second, we also see that there are certain set themes which have been devised while celebrating this cultural heritage. The themes are of sevenfold, and the first theme is referred to as Doors of India or Pravesh, which is referring to the cultural assimilation that India has promoted over a period of time for last few millennia, wherein we see that there is a syncretic culture that we have in India as of now. It is from this particular context, this particular theme is being celebrated. Second, we have what is referred to as Gardens of India. These Gardens of India, while promoting the emancipation of material wealth, alongside it also promotes the spaces which are preserved to be the natural spaces for the utility of the communities. Historically, this had been a trend within the Indian context. Third, we also have this Boulis of India as another theme, wherein given the fact that we lie in this tropical zone, unless and until we save and preserve water for the utility, we will not be in a position to thrive as a civilization. So the construction of these step walls, which we refer to as Boulis in the local language, was and has been a practice as part of our cultural heritage. Apart from this, you have these temples of India, which had been the places of not only religious and spiritual interest, but also of commercial interest and but also of interest of livelihood. The temples of India have been a thriving example of Indian culture. Alongside this theme of architectural wonders of independent India, wherein the new constructions which are being planned by the government itself are being showcased as one particular theme. Overall, we also have a celebration in terms of the indigenous designs that we have promoted alongside the participation of various genders in the art and architecture of India. On the other hand, we also see that this particular event is being projected by the government as a modern way of cultural renaissance of India. By terming this as a modern way of cultural renaissance of India, alongside various such initiatives that you see across the world, we want to place even this particular biennial which has been inaugurated now on the plank of these global cultural initiatives. For example, in Sao Paulo, they celebrate one such event, and across the world, it is very, very well known. Second, we also have that these cultural spaces across cities which are being constructed by the government itself. For example, you have these ongoing projects in Delhi where they are redeveloping what is referred to as Central Vista project. Number two, there is revitalization of Esplanade in Kolkata. And number three, the reimagining of Bhendi Bazaar, one of the rich cultural heritage that we have from Mumbai, and the development of Sabarmati riverfront in Ahmedabad. All these have been referred to as cultural spaces across the cities, wherein on the one hand you are promoting urbanization, on the other hand we are also saying that we are not leaving behind the rich cultural heritage that Indian society has. Moreover, we also have that this idea of materializing the culture and heritage has to be promoted. What does it mean? We know that the Indian art in the form of classical music, either Hindustani classical or Carnatic classical, or the various dance forms that we have, or even the practice of yoga that we have promoted across the generations in India, we see that this has gained a lot of popularity amongst international tourists. Not only in India but also across the world, these have to be promoted in such a way that not only this translate into promotion of Indian culture, but also alongside it also generates certain livelihood opportunities for the Indian residents. Moreover, we also have this theme of unity in diversity within this Indian cultural renaissance. Throughout the Indian society, this had been the main feature leading to the formation of a syncretic society within India. Not only the Sufi movement but also the Bhakti movement, which have continued till date, have been the clear examples of one such syncretic culture in India. This event is trying to showcase all those facts and factors which showcase this theme of unity in diversity, where in spite of regionalization in the culture, we know that as a community, we are a one single community as such culturally. Now, we shall practice few preliminary and main questions. Take this first question. It's asking you to consider the following: the doors of India, the garden of India, bowls of India, and the temples of India. It's asking how many of the above themes are included in the Indian art, architecture and design biennial that is held at the Red Fort. As you already know, all the four are there, hence the answer is D. We'll move to the second question. The question is asking you to consider the following statements. The first statement is talking about the CDSCO as the national regulatory body for pharmaceuticals, for medical devices and also for cosmetics. The second statement is referring to a pharmacopoeia as a book containing the official standards for the medicines and related substances. The third statement is referring to the possibility that in India, the price of essential drugs can be regulated under the Essential Commodities Act. All these three statements being correct, the answer has to be D. We'll move to the third question. Third question saying that consider the following statements. The inquiry committee of parliament, such as ethics committee, are of quasi-judicial in nature. We know this. This is correct statement. The second statement is that the Indian constitution is guaranteeing the principle of due process of law. We know that this is also embedded in Article 21. Which of the above statements are correct? We know that both of the statements are correct, hence the answer has to be C. Moving to fourth question. Which of the following statements are correct about the Monetary Policy Committee? There are 6 members in the committee, which is right. 3 members are from the RBI, which is also right. Other 3 members of the Monetary Policy Committee are appointed by the central government, which is also right. And the governor or the RBI governor is the ex officio chairman of the committee. All the 4 statements being right, the answer has to be D. The fifth question. Global Climate 2011-2020, a decade of acceleration, was in news recently, which is released by A. World Meteorological Organization, which is what is right. B. UN Environment Program. C. International Center for Integrated Mountain Development. And D. None of the above. As we know that the answer is A. It is World Meteorological Organization. Now we shall practice a mains question. Take this question. Describe the Ethics Committee and the Privileges Committee in the Indian Parliament. Compare and contrast their functions, powers, and the scope of judicial review in their decisions. Being a 250-word answers, this is going to be a comprehensive question. As it is well structured, the answer is also easy to write. In the introduction, one has to describe about the Ethics Committee and the Privileges Committee as the inquiry committees of the Indian Parliament, and here one can raise the importance of these particular inquiry committees in the functioning of the Indian Parliament. Then he can move to differentiating what are the functions, powers, and the scope for the judicial review with respect to both of these committees. At the conclusion, one can emphasize how there has to be a balance between the definition of the ethics and the ethical conduct. Second, how there has to be the intrusion and inclusion of the due process and the transparency and accountability, which are in fact the probity that they ensure in the public life. Put together, one has to present the balance to be ascertained between all these particular factors. Committees whereby you are referring to the catering to the idea of procedural justice and the substantial justice. Concluding this session, I hope you have liked this particular session. We'll meet with few other exciting articles in the next session of DNA. Thanks for watching. Do like, share and comment on the video. Don't forget to subscribe this channel. Thank you one and all.